Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia.
And I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
We are back to the beginning this week, reading Genesis chapter 1:1 to chapter 2, verse 4, the very first Bible story, the story of creation in 7 days. But come on, isn't it really 6 days? In 6 days, God shows us a way of creating in the ultimate yes and mode, constantly making space for what is breathtakingly new without destroying or diluting what was there. It's a mode of creation that is exponential, where creatures themselves are meant to create, and life begets life, and every single life supports another. What does it mean for us to be made in the image of this kind of God? And seriously, with all the work there is to do in the world, how can rest be so important to creation that we count the seventh day in with the others? Thanks for being with us. Well, Bobby Williamson, what are you doing here?
Hey, it's time to do Bible Worm again, Amy. Can you believe it?
I know. Okay, did you are you like a summer camp person? Were you raised in summer camps?
I was always scared to be away from home. And so I did go to summer camp, but it was always Boy Scout camp, which is a certain kind of a camp that has some good things about it. And also, it's just a bunch of boys with knives.
Yeah.
Hanging out in the woods.
You were scared, so you decided to go to a camp that was a bunch of boys with knives. Okay, that's good.
Yes. I'm not sure how. Yes, that is what I did. But I'm curious, were you a summer camp person?
I was not a summer camp person as a child. I wanted to be, but that was not in the stars for me. But then I went for several years as an adult, like an adult at camp, like helping out, working in a sleepaway camp. And they would do at lunchtime sometimes cheers, which was incredibly overwhelming, like if you're sort of sitting in the sensory experience of it, like in that time. But this morning, getting ready to come back to Bible Worm, I got this cheer in my head, so I have to teach it to you.
Oh, good, yeah.
Okay, so there are two parts to it. One is that everyone is saying, who is excited? Who is excited? Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's excited? Like, and you just sort of like keep going and you're pounding on your lunch table while you're doing that.
Oh my goodness.
And then someone yells out like, I'm excited to go for a swim. And everyone yells, she's excited to go for a swim. Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's excited? And like people just like spring up. So I thought we could do this just like one round. And like, I'll be excited about something and then you'll be excited.
I got to be excited about something. I'm not the most excitable fellow.
You'll think of something. I'll just keep saying who's excited until you're like, dear God, I'm excited for this cheer to end. And that can be your excitement.
Okay, you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Who's excited?
Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's excited? I'm excited to read the Torah.
She's excited to read the Torah.
Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's excited? Who's excited?
I'm excited to talk about Jesus. Are you, Amy?
No. Well, it doesn't matter. I can just say, he's excited to talk about Jesus. Who's excited? Who's excited?
Yes, excited. Yeah.
Didn't that help? Aren't you excited now?
I'm super excited now. I could have never been more excited. Amy, we're in year 7 of Bible Worm. And we are in year 4 of the narrative lectionary cycle, which is this is the John cycle in terms of the Gospels. And so starting in December, we'll be headed over into the Gospel of John. Mm-hmm. And so in some way, you know how the narrative lectionary is. Oftentimes the texts that are in the Hebrew scriptures in the fall are kind of setting the stage or like wetting their whistles for what we're going to cover in the spring. I don't know that we need to be thinking about that, but it is a way that the narrative lectionary seems to work that's worth kind of keeping our minds on.
So our reading today is really truly back at the very beginning, starting in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1, the first story of creation.
Yes.
I can't imagine you have context to give us, do you?
I think it would be a little chutzpahdik to give context to what has happened before Genesis 1:1. There are things you could talk about the Babylonian context or the Enuma Elish or whatever.
Yeah.
But, since the world begins in formlessness and void, I think maybe so should then Bible Worm.
Well, then I'm just going to start.
Yeah,
I'm
let's do it.
reading from the NJPS translation and picking up in verse 1. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day. God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the water, that it may separate water from water." God made the expanse, and it separated the water which was below the expanse from the water which was above the expanse. And it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening, and there was morning, a second day. God said, "Let the water below the sky be gathered into one area, that the dry land may appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that this was good.
Amy, you ended in the middle of a day and it is making my head hurt.
I know, but we have read this story so many times. You got to do something different.
That's true. Who's excited? Who's excited? I'm excited to end in the middle of the day.
I stopped before anything was alive. That was my rubric.
All right.
Rubric? Yes, that was my rubric.
Sure. Rubric's good. I like it.
Okay. I, several weeks ago, was meeting with a group of people, a group of Jews on Shavuot, actually, and we were engaging in this sort of like art-based consideration of text through this program called the Jewish Studio Project, and this was our text. And so the idea was sort of like we read just a little bit from Genesis chapter 1, and then we had a little time in Havruta, like partnered conversation, and then we just had open art time to do whatever happened artistically on the page. And the reason I'm telling you this is that at the table there was a speaker of modern Hebrew, and he really was, I don't know if hung up makes it sound negative, but like he was thinking a lot about this phrase tohu vavohu.
Oh, yes.
And I just wonder if we can talk a little bit about different ways that we have heard that translated or what we think it's getting at. He was really seeing it as like sort of opposites. Like I think the translation we had chaos and void, which sometimes I have seen in the Hebrew Bible. Here it has sort of emptiness and void, or unformed and void. But he really experienced these words as sort of like yin and yang, like these sort of two different kinds of fundamental powers in the world. How do you sit with those words? What is it that's here when God begins to create?
The traditional translation that I am familiar with is formlessness and void.
Yeah.
Which sounds like an absence.
Mm-hmm.
But as it turns out, it seems like there's water there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the sort of like, I like the translation you're thinking about, like chaos. Mm-hmm. Like there is stuff, but it doesn't have any like shape or like it's not really intelligible because it's just murkiness or something.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in this idea of the yin and the yang though. Like I'm trying to think like, okay, well, what's the other side? Like I can't make it into a binary or opposing forces or whatever. Mm-hmm. Do you have like, how was your colleague doing that?
I mean, so the only other place that I know of in the Hebrew Bible where these words come up together is in Isaiah 34:11. And it is typically translated there as chaos and emptiness, which is, again, I think sort of pointing to your observation that like, it seems like there's not nothing. There's water and there's darkness, which may have a sense of having a substance about it in this text. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah.
And if there's really emptiness, like true emptiness and void is not chaos.
Right.
So I guess that's the sort of best I can come. I mean, look, I think this guy was coming sort of from the perspective of modern Hebrew, which can be a dangerous game because modern
Sure.
Hebrew, comes out of biblical Hebrew
Right.
at a quick clip, But I do think it's really evocative to think about the ways in which it may be sort of holding two ends of a continuum.
Yes.
There is watery chaos that fills all the space, as it seems to do. And there's also emptiness.
My little brain cannot hold both of those things together at the same time.
Yeah.
But I mean, I kind of like that concept of like, I mean, the whole point here is that it's not like something that you can like wrap your head around or describe
That's right.
exactly because
That's right.
it's not formed enough. And so the idea that the concepts are bouncing off each other seems entirely appropriate.
Yeah.
The traditional translation of this is that first phrase is a complete sentence in itself. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, period.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this is the Vulgate's translation and very, very important in Christian theology that God created out of nothing. There was nothing, God created, and now there's tohu vavohu. The modern translations, and I really like the way that NJPS was translating it, it sees that as a temporal clause. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, it was formlessness and void. And then God acted on, or tohu vavohu, whatever that is, darkness and water. And then God created out of that. It crashes into traditional Christian theology, though. I think it's pretty straight up heresy to say that there are things that exist in the world that God did not create. God began to work from something.
Mm.
Does Judaism struggle with that, or in your tradition, do you struggle with that sort of difference, or is that clearer?
I don't feel like I can speak to Judaism broadly on this question. I can speak to my own sort of upbringing with this text, and I was familiar with the translation that you suggested in the beginning. And like the Hebrew is ambiguous, but as you go on to read the story, there was some kind of water there.
Yes.
Like the first acts of creation are not making raw materials.
I think the traditional understanding would be there was nothing and then God created and now there's tohu vavohu. So there's nothing.
That would be a weird place to start, though.
It's like when you throw a lump of clay on the potter's wheel, right? It's first there's nothing there, and then you're like, and then
Let's see.
There's something there to work with, but you had to, I don't know, that was not a fully formed analogy, but
No, I liked it.
I
liked it. I like the sound effects of it, too. That's good.
The reason that people tend to read that, grammatically, you're right, it's ambiguous. The other ancient Near Eastern, look at me telling about ancient Near Eastern texts, even though I said I wasn't going to, like the Enuma Elish and Atrahasis, these other stories from Mesopotamia and Ugarit, they begin with this, like, when the gods began to create, and there's already, like in the Enuma Elish, there's already fresh water and salt water, and they are intermingling, and then that's what starts the creative process. And so when you read this text in light of those other texts, that seems to be the most likely way of putting it together.
No, I think that's really helpful. And it's hard to read this text as though those other texts didn't exist. I mean, that was
right.
It's the world that this is springing up from. So
Right.
I think it makes sense to have those in mind. Bobby, then it mentions that we have darkness over the surface of the deep and a wind from God, or maybe a great wind sweeping over the water. This phrase, over the deep, is not just sort of like, the deep end of the pool.
Right.
Right? Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what what this seems to be talking about?
Yeah, I mean, these are the depths, the tehomot. And I mean, this is the geological, mythogeological sense is like the water that like goes to the core of the earth, basically. It's the deepest depths. And like in the book of Job, like the place of the dead is down there, and like it's like deep, deep down. That word tehomot reminds a lot of scholars of the saltwater goddess in the Enuma Elish from Babylon, whose name is Tiamat, who is the like ferocious, like counterposing force to Marduk, the Babylonian god. And so some people see this as like a transposition of that idea, that the tehomot are like this, like the fundamental force of chaos in the world or something like that. Here they don't have, Tiamat was like a monster. Here the depths don't have that kind of character. Like they're passive. Passive's not exactly right, but they're not an active force against God, but there's some kind of like deep sense of chaos that God is then going to have to put into some sort of order or something like that.
Yeah.
What were you thinking about that?
I mean, I was thinking something really similar. I think just this image of like these waters that have darkness and also a ruach Elohim sort of soaring over them, and just and all of it continues to exist. Like all of these things are just sort of in a space together, but before anything has happened, right? Like God is about to say, "Let there be light."
Right.
But I guess it's somehow striking to me that God doesn't destroy the primordial water or really do anything to it just at first.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just this, again, I guess maybe it has the tohu vavohu is making me think of like the coexistence of these things that feel really different in my mind, in my heart right now. There's sort of like darkness and primordial water.
Yes.
And then there's also this wind of God. And they just are, gam v'gam. They're both there.
I like that, yeah. Because I do think like in the human experience, especially in the ancient human experience, like both the deep sea and darkness were kind of scary unknowables, and you never quite knew what was going to emerge from them. And so the fact that they remain there and God works with them and works out of them, as we'll see, but doesn't dispose of them, I think that's really important. What's ringing in my head a little bit is from our Revelation series, the last text in Revelation 21, where New Jerusalem comes down and the text says, "And the sea was no more," which is so interesting that like that text is envisioning, like in the eschatological future, the sea actually does go away.
Yeah.
But when God is creating here, God doesn't seem to feel the need to dispose of it, or doesn't for whatever reason.
Yeah. Okay, then we get this famous, maybe the most famous line of this whole story. God says, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Yes.
A little later on, we're going to get the creation of the sun and the moon.
Right, on day 4.
On day 4. Do you have either teachings either from your tradition or from your academic background or from your very own little heart about what this light is, if it's not the sun?
Right. Yeah. So here we have light without the sun. Yeah. There's a couple of ways that I have tended to think about it. One is just to note that in much of the ancient Near East surrounding ancient Israel, the sun was a god, and the sun was the source of light, like Shamash, the god in Babylon, the sun god. And so one can read this as sort of a counter mythology to the Babylonian claim that the sun is a deity, to say, no, we don't even have the sun yet, and there is light. And so it's pushing back to like the God of the Bible, Elohim here. It is in some way the source of light, and you can't attribute that to somebody else. There's also that lovely text that we read every once in a while. We read it in our creation series, I think, Psalm 104, in which God wakes up in the morning and like puts on a robe that is made of light. And I just really like that image of like either God is the source of light or like God wears light as a garment. I don't know that that's exactly what this text is thinking about, but it's in the biblical imagination. And I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah. I feel like it's difficult. If you know that text, it's impossible not to, somehow connect this light and that teaching that God wears light as a garment.
Sure.
There's a Jewish teaching that this light is called the Or HaGanuz, which is this light, the hidden light that allows the first human to see like to all the ends of creation. Like it's this light from God, like some kind of like crazy existential light that then God realizes like, oh, humans can't handle that much information here. And so it gets tucked away and sort of tucked much more into the world of doing the right thing in the world. Like that's how we sort of access that kind of light. But here in the story, it's the first light that, again, coexists with the darkness. It's not now suddenly light all the time, or it's not like a little light because it's been mixed in with the darkness. So it's like dim everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get day and night. Okay. Even though we've read this text like 100 times probably in our lives, always by the time I get to this point, I have forgotten that there's no earth yet. Like everything is like water. It's water everywhere. There's no air. There's no land. It is only water. Now there's light in the water and there's dark in the water, but it's still water.
Yes.
Before, like we had God sort of separating things that were different, separating light from darkness.
Yes.
And here God is separating things that are the same.
Yeah.
Instead of like creating space around the edges, which seems like it would have been, if you ask me, the more obvious thing to do is like put all the water in one place. But that's not what happens here. I don't know. I just wonder if, does that hit you in any kind of way? Like what it means to take something that is grouped all together and separate it into two parts and put something in the middle?
I mean, I do think it is interesting that, this text is envisioning like the water that's going to end up above. So the dome here, the rakia, like that word is related to like a metal bowl or something. Like just trying to like imagine like, well, what is the atmosphere? Well, it's like a metal bowl kind of. And that above
it's like a contact lens.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's going to be water above and water beneath. And we haven't pulled out the land yet. Not we, but God. And so, but that concept of like, there's water above and water below, and like we're in the midst of this like little air bubble. What ends up is like a snow globe, but backwards. So like instead of like a little bubble of water surrounded by air, it's a little bubble of air surrounded by water. And like we're like, that's the world that we live in. It's so fascinating to me to think about that. It's like, I mean, this livable space is just a little carve out in the middle of this chaos and void or whatever it is, the unlivable space, uninhabitable space. It's sort of like I don't know, it's the otherness of humankind or the otherness of like livable space. It's not like the expectation. It's the like, it's kind of a miracle that there is a space that has been separated out for us. Yeah. That's kind of where it takes my head.
Yeah.
What about you?
I love that, Bobby. And I think like that's just how I keep thinking about this first part of the text before anything is even alive.
Right.
Like to go from there's only water and darkness to now there's also light. Like how do you even imagine light when there's only darkness?
Yeah.
And how do you even imagine air when there's only water?
Yeah.
And I know like whatever, we're familiar with this text and we're also familiar with the world we live in. But if you actually think of this as like an artist, God as artist who is creating, it is just the wildest divine imagination to think, let me do this thing next.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm finding it incredibly moving today. Like it's just this impossible and quite ridiculous thing to add into this piece of art that God is creating.
I love the way you're talking about that, Amy. And to me, this is one of the values of reading the text the way we're reading it and not as creation out of nothing.
Yeah.
Creation out of nothing, you get like a blank canvas where God could make whatever God wants. And then you're like, well, why did God make chaos? Like, God could have just not done that. But the way we're sort of headed here is like everything was chaos. And God made a livable place out of it. And what a miracle that is. And so the whole of just existence becomes this sense, like existence within the chaotic water feels miraculous in a way that just like, sometimes I think we can be a little complacent about like, yeah, we exist, like whatever, like it's fine. You know what I mean?
This is fine.
And like, why do bad things happen to good people? And which is a fair question, but this is a little bit like, holy goodness, y'all. Like, there's a place we can live. Like, it's amazing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the new season of Bible Worm. We're so glad you've joined us. As a gift to you, for the month of September, Amy and I are offering every Bible Worm listener a chance to join our Patreon community for free for 1 month with no automatic renewals and no obligation to continue. You'll receive the podcast a week before everyone else, full liturgies written by our friend Terry Peterson, video Bible studies with discussion questions led by yours truly, and a monthly visit with the Bible Worm Collaborative to explore texts upcoming in the narrative lectionary. If you've ever wanted to try our Patreon, or if you're just hearing about it for the first time, here's your chance. To join the Bible Worm Patreon for free, just look for the gift link on our Facebook page, in the Narrative Lectionary Facebook group, or in the description of this episode on your podcast application or at BibleWormPodcast.com. Join anytime between now and the end of September to receive your 1 month free. We hope to see you soon, and thanks for listening to Bible Worm. Now, back to this week's episode.
All right. Can I move us into the land of the living?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to pick up in verse 11. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plants, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a third day. God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years. And they serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to dominate the day and the lesser light to dominate the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, to dominate the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that this was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a 4th day. God said, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures and birds that fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky. God created the great sea monsters and all the living creatures of every kind that creep, which the waters brought forth in swarms, and all the winged birds of every kind. And God saw that this was good. God blessed them, saying, be fertile and increase, fill the waters in the skies, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, a 5th day. Bobby, I love hearing you talk about the really emphatic repetition of the presence of seeds in these plants that are created. If I were going to describe the abundant vegetation that is on earth, I would not first be talking about the seeds of things. I'd talk about like, it's green, there's like leafiness and flowers.
Yes.
There are no animals yet to eat the fruit when the fruit is created. Can you talk about the seeds?
I mean, yes. I mean, it's so like, let the earth grow, plant life, plants yielding seeds, and fruit trees with seeds, each according to its kind, and then produce with seeds. Each had seeds. Like, there's so many seeds.
There's so many seeds.
To me, that's connected to this other idea that's here, which is that God says, let the earth grow, and then the earth grows, like the earth puts forth, which to me reads very differently than like God planted an apple tree and there was an apple tree, but God invited the earth to produce, and the earth is like, oh, all right, and then like responded. So the way that I kind of read that is like the earth had its own creative capacity that God called forth from it. And so the earth would not have created without God's invitation, but God invites it to create of its own accord, and it responds. And to me, the seeds are connected to that, you know, the earth produced fruit that could then, and plants and grains that could then produce more and more and more. So the creative capacity that God calls forth from the earth becomes a creative capacity that has sort of, potentially infinite extension within itself, that the earth can continue to recreate. That's what I'm thinking about it today. Where would you take that?
I think you just said it so beautifully. I think that's, it's not this idea that God doesn't really seem to intend from the beginning to be fully in control of everything that is happening. God, from the beginning, gives creation the power to create, to recreate.
Right.
And then this seems to be augmented or underscored or whatever in the blessing that is given to the animals to be fruitful and multiply, be fertile and increase. That's the first blessing we have, right?
Yes.
And that seems like a big deal.
It is. Yes, I love that connection. It's interesting. Like, I think of that as a command. I guess it is also a blessing.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that the first command is given to not humans, but to creepy crawly things. And the command is be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so there is that sort of like God's, I don't know if it's an invitation or a imperative or exactly how we want to think about it, but yes, things have productive capacity from the seeds, from the plants to the snails, and like all of the creatures have the capacity to create, which is a really beautiful thing.
I love that question of the extent to which it's a blessing and the extent to which it's a command, because it is certainly an imperative form. And it says God blessed them and said this imperative, so I guess it's a little bit of both, a blessing and a responsibility.
I was talking a minute ago about how God calls forth the creative capacity of the earth.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could read this the same way, like God blesses them and says, and now I'm going to call forth your creative capacity, so that the blessing and the command are sort of part of a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you were, well, maybe I shouldn't say you were, the narrative lectionary is also thinking, it titles this episode, I think, Creation from the Word, or it has some emphasis on sort of like the role of speech in all of this.
Because it knows we're headed to John 1:1. Yeah.
Because it knows we're headed to John 1, right? And that's fine. But even if like as a Jew reading the text, I'm like, well, I'm not personally headed to John.
Right. Yeah.
But I do think, we have God creates through speech, and also through speech, God gives this blessing and command that sort of furthers, I don't know, it just seems like such an exponential increase in creative capacity to empower the creatures themselves to also create.
The other thing that's interesting to me in this text, Amy, is that the role of the celestial bodies is to keep time, basically. The sun and the moon are keeping track of day and night. And I guess the moon is keeping track of months. The stars are moving through the skies to keep track of seasons.
Yeah.
And, I think those can be read both as like, now it's planting season, now it's harvest season, but also like holy time. Like, this is the way we know like what celebrations, what ways of worshiping God are appropriate in this season. So I'm curious where you take it to think about like ingrained in creation itself before there are humans is this kind of cycle of seasons and maybe even holy seasons.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Yeah, when I first saw it here, I was like, this seems so abstract in this, like, really sort of like creating the materiality. Is that the word?
Let's go with it. I like it.
Okay, so creating the substance of things in the earth. Now we're creating time. Like, that's very abstract. And I also was thinking about it, I think vis-a-vis one of the Psalms we read, maybe in our creation care series, that talked about sort of, during the nighttime, certain animals come out, and during the daytime, certain
Psalm
animals,
104
like
too,
humans, create. Yeah. And you know what? I was talking the beginning of this chapter about the coexistence of very different things. There's nothing that is just sort of pushed off the table. There's a wide variety and what is present in creation. And part of what the day and the night and the seasons and the months do is create a way for us to coexist with each other in natural cycles.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about how sort of holy time fits into that. I'll have to think about that.
For me, the holy time thing connects somewhat. Like we see these passages in the Hebrew scripture and also in the New Testament that, if humans don't worship, then even the rocks will shout, or whatever. Or like all of creation will join in. And so I like that idea that humans aren't, strictly speaking, necessary for God to be worshiped. Like creation itself is fully capable of worshiping.
I love that. We don't even have humans yet in this story.
That's true.
Should we go on and create some more things?
We need to get us some humans.
Okay. I'm picking up in verse 24. God said, "Let the earth bring forth every kind of living creature, cattle, creeping things, and wild beasts of every kind." And it was so. God made wild beasts of every kind and cattle of every kind and all kinds of creeping things on the earth. And God saw that this was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth." And God created man in God's image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth." God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is the breath of life, I give all the green plants for food." And it was so. And God saw all that he had made and found it very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. It's a little bit hard for me to read this text and think about anything other than what exactly is the role of humans in this equation.
Yes.
First of all, I just need to sort of emphasize, as the text emphasizes in verse 27, between 26 and 27, the idea that humans are created in God's image is as emphatic as the plants have seeds. Like,
yes.
Really over and over and over again.
Can you talk about what that is understood to mean, and either in your tradition or in your own reading?
Oh, man. I mean, I feel like this is like the, $100,000 question.
Yes.
What does it mean?
It reminded me of Dr. Evil right there, where he's like, $1 million. And everybody laughs because like $1 million is nothing. I'm like, $100,000 question. Come on.
Okay. It's more than
like $100 trillion question.
I almost said $10,000 question, but I was like, no, that's that's not enough.
Yeah. Okay. You'd already inflated it tenfold. So fair enough.
I can tell you the way that I'm thinking about it now is the Hebrew word image is tselem, but tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And I've been thinking a lot lately about a possible relationship to the word tsel, which means shadow, meaning that humans, where there's a human, it means you are the shadow of God. And so if you're there, it means God is there also, just doesn't, have a body here to walk around on earth. And so we are sort of the representatives of God on earth, is how I guess my best way of understanding it.
That resonates with me and my interpretation as well. In the ancient Near Eastern contexts, the king of Babylon, say, was understood as bearing the image of God on the earth, which meant the king ruled the earth with God's authority kind of idea. And so this may be that, which is I like your way of getting there through shadow more than I like my way of getting there through kingship, but they're related. Compared to the Mesopotamian idea that the king is uniquely that. Here we have like every human being, male and female, is God's emissary on the earth or something like that. So like a democratization of it.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. And I feel like the sort of danger of that is it gets tied up in these words of like rule and I don't know, does it have dominate in this one or is that the next one? Sort of this idea of like control and, perhaps have power over, do whatever you want with, like that kind of thinking. But if you just came from reading the rest of this story,
right,
and try to derive from that, what is the God that you are a reflection of? That's really crazy.
Yes.
To think it might be your job to just to not care about about the well-being of all these creatures. But it certainly does get used that way.
That idea has a really kind of tragic resonance in the Christian tradition. Some Christians read that, and I mean, I don't know that it's unique to Christians, but they read it the way you're saying is like the earth is there for human exploitation.
That's right.
And so they kind of read it as like, literally as we can do whatever we want because God said we could. And I mean, fair enough as a reading of the text, but what you're saying is exactly right. Like if your role is to rule the earth in the way that God rules the earth, like what we have seen is God making life possible where life is otherwise not possible, and God beckoning forth creative activity of all of the creatures, and God wanting there to be growth and like abundance. And so to think like, okay, well that means like I can do whatever I want and exploit the earth it's a bad reading of the text. And
it's a bad reading.
Impoverished theology.
And it really pulls, exactly as you're saying, it really pulls it out of context. You're just focusing on a couple of verbs of domination. But if you are to rule in the way that God rules, yes, you might have to create space between this thing and that thing so they don't overwhelm each other. But like the whole goal seems to be to figure out how all these different entities can coexist and thrive and be fruitful in the world. And that's a really big charge for us to have, and watching it be sort of like twisted into this very sort of like brutish weapon of we get to do whatever we feel like, this is all here for our entertainment is quite distressing.
Yes, I'm fully with you there. The other way of reading the image of God that I think is really important is something about, like, there's different ways of getting here, but that every human being bears God's imprint in whatever way that means is a really important way of thinking about human interaction, human to human interaction, is that when we encounter another human, whoever they are, we are also encountering somebody who bears God's image in the way that we ourselves bear God's image. And I think that leads you to something like every human being has infinite value and worth, or like every human being is dear in God's heart, or I don't know exactly how you want to say that, but like in the same way that we're saying like creation's not there to be exploited, this image also says other human beings are not there to be exploited, but that when we see them, we are encountering a manifestation of God's design, and we ought to treat them as such, and we also ought to view ourselves as such. Yes. So when we wonder like, what am I worth? Like, well, what you're worth is you bear God's image. Like you're worth a lot.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so important, Bobby. There's one reading of this section of the text you probably have encountered before, from the sort of world of queer interpretation of the text. But this, at the end of verse 27, when it says, male and female, God created them. One way of reading it is that these are the these are the two variations of humans. You can be male or you can be female. It was understood that way for a long time. And you can also read it as each human contains male and female at least at this point in creation, and maybe at some point there's a separation or whatnot, but that male and female were held together at some point, which I think is a really beautiful reading that captures the diversity of human experience in a way that the other reading does not.
That's right. My understanding is that's not only a modern queer reading, but then in fact the ancient rabbis, I think,
I think you're right.
Original humans as androgynous is the typical word, but I think gender nonconforming or multigendered, I think is a way of reading it.
Yes, I think you're right. That is not newfangled. Yeah, it's deeply rooted.
The other thing I would just say there is I noticed your translation translates Adam as man. God created man in God's own image. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, that's a very traditional way of rendering that word Adam into English. But the word Adam there is really more akin to the way we typically would use humanity or human. So God created humanity in God's own image, male and female. I think is, I just like that way of talking about it because it doesn't prioritize the manness of man.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
That's just a JPS choice.
It is a JPS thing, but I'm really glad that you pointed it out. Thank you.
Here's the last thing I just want to say about this text. There's so many things.
I know.
Is that in this text, God gives humans plants to eat. And also God gives all wildlife plants to eat, green grass for food. So humans get plants and fruit, and animals seem to get grass. And so the whole world is vegetarian.
That's right.
Lions are vegetarians. It's so amazing. This was the way that the world was originally envisioned or created to be. Yes.
I know. I've spent a lot of time reading this, concerned about whether that means I don't get kale.
Yeah.
It's a green plant. But
that's so funny. Yeah.
And it makes me think back to this sort of emphasis on the creation of fruits before even there was creation of people to eat the fruit. It is more than having a sort of utilitarian purpose, but these different species do support each other's well-being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The eating of meat doesn't become a thing in the biblical text until after the flood. Mm-hmm. And then God seems to recognize that humans are by our nature violent, and so says, okay, you can eat other animals.
You need an outlet for this. Mm-hmm. This is what you can do.
Yeah.
All right. We have a couple of verses from chapter 2. I'm picking up in verse 1. The heaven and the earth were finished, and all their array. On the seventh day, God finished the work that he had been doing, and he ceased on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation that he had done. Such is the story of heaven and earth when they were created. I'm stopping there in the middle of verse 4, as has become somewhat traditional to do, understanding the second half of that verse as sort of belonging to the next creation story.
Yes.
Bobby, why is this last day in here?
Right?
All the work was done already. Why do we talk about, why is there even a seventh day? The work was done in 6 days, but the seventh day is so important to the story.
God wasted a whole day. God could have just gotten up and gotten some stuff done. Earned a little more money.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what humans are for, right? Is to labor constantly.
Anxious productivity for the win.
For the win. I think that is so important, that rest for its own sake here is built into the cycle of creation. It's a 7-day week. 6 of them are for working. That's good. Productivity. The 7th day, you need to rest.
Yeah.
And so here it is God who rests. Even God who is, beyond fatigue, chooses to take a day and cease productivity. And that's going to become, of course, the basis for the Sabbath commandment to humans in Exodus. But here it's just God making that making
Right
that
here,
choice.
this is a moment in the life of God. This is what God did. God rested on the seventh day.
How do you think about this day being here, Amy?
I mean, I'm feeling pulled back right now to this sort of image of God as sort of artist, crafter, creator,
Yeah.
and what it is to how you know when something is finished. I mean, God could have just kept on going. It's not,
Sure. Yeah.
and taking time to like stop and appreciate what you have made and sort of like sit with it and, like let it be, let it breathe is sort of like part of the whole point of making art in the first place. Like if you're making art and you just keep going and going and going and going and you never stop to look at it, then why are you making art? So I don't know the extent, like how far we want to push that particular way of thinking about the text into this, but I guess it's part of how I think about Shabbat is if you don't have a day that you try to zoom out, yes, to rest for sure, and also to really like appreciate
Yes.
as fully as you can all the good that is around you.
Yes.
That in some way creation is not complete if nobody's doing that. Like the witnessing of the thing is part of the thing.
I love that. Because we've had these little moments, of course, in this text where God does sit back and make like, oh, that's good, and then keeps going. And so we've had these little moments of like appreciation in the middle of the work. Mm-hmm. But I love that idea that then when the work is done, to sit back and appreciate what has been created and just to let it be and observe it. I love that idea. The other thing that's here on day 6 is when God creates human beings, it's never said that human beings are good. God never looks and says, oh, that's really good. Mm-hmm. But in verse 31, God saw everything that he had made. It was supremely good, the CEB has, or it was very good. Mm-hmm. And I've just always thought that's important, is that when God observes the goodness of human beings, it's in the context of observing the whole of creation, not in the context of just human beings by ourselves. That has seemed like an important piece of this. Like when God sits back, this is what God sees. Human beings in the context of creation, that's very good.
Yes. I think that goes back so nicely to what we were talking about before in terms of what does it mean for humans to act as rulers in the image of God over creation, that there's a whole context to to this that is very good. Yes. But if you take just one little piece out of it, it is not necessarily very good.
Amy, you said something last year I think it was in our creation series last year. You noticed that the human beings are created as the last thing on day 6. And the first thing humans then experience, the first day of human existence, was this rest day. Mm-hmm. So first of all, I just love that. And I've been thinking about that for like a year. Second of all, teaching. How do you unfold that teaching a little bit?
Yeah, this is not my original observation. There's a midrash about it that asks the question of why humans are created so late in the process. And some of it is, that if humans were created at the beginning, maybe they would think they were the most important, and humans must not think that they are the most important. And I think that is good and valuable and a teaching we should hold on to. But I think in the context of at least my own life and the folks around me in my community, the teaching that feels more pressing is sort of what you were alluding to before when you were saying, like, what do you mean? Why don't we just have 6 days and work all the time? Like, if you're not getting anything done, your life has no value,
Yeah.
I think having the teaching that we are first and foremost a reflection of God in our very being, that's first. And yes, there's work to do. We do have to do the work. But I think launching into that work before you have sort of like the love of the place where you are and like the time to spend just being in creation and seeing the way that the animals, whatever, frolic around and eat your figs when they're supposed to be eating the grass. You're like, what? Like, whatever it is, that's a really different kind of work for me. Like work that can come out of that kind of spaciousness and appreciation, instead of work that is attentive only to the things that are broken and on fire, of which there are many, and we do need to respond. That's what I keep going back to myself in that Friday afternoon creation.
I love that so much. And I think that's the reframing that was so helpful to me, is I've always sort of read this text like sort of me inhabiting the perspective of God, right? Which is you do all this work, and at the end of the work, you have earned a day of rest. So work is the thing, and rest is the
that's
reward.
Your reward for doing the work, right?
But from the human perspective in this text, it's exactly what you're saying, which I love, is that the first thing is the rest and the appreciation and the enjoyment. And then the work is necessary, and the work grows out of that. But the work is secondary to that originary sort of restfulness and reflection. I mean, I don't quite know how to live that out in my daily life, but it's really just changed the way that I think about the role of work in my life in some very valuable ways.
Bobby, no pressure. It's only the most famous story in the entire Hebrew Bible.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a top three.
Yeah.
What's feeling alive for you today in this story?
One of the things that I have appreciated about this text is, it's about the original story of creation, but there is an awareness in the biblical text that creation is an ongoing exercise, and that God is constantly in the business of creating. And, I'm thinking about 2nd Isaiah, where God says, I'm about to do something new. There is a new creation that God is constantly bringing about, and that humans as the image of God are invited into. And so this sort of abstract notion of creation becomes very real and present for me in thinking about the tohu vavohu in which we currently exist, and the chaos that is always around us that sometimes feels overwhelming, maybe as though it is the only thing, and that there's no space in which to live and thrive and breathe. And that this text about God creating habitable space out of cosmic tohu vavohu is sort of an invitation or a model for humans creating livable, habitable space out of political tohu vavohu, maybe is a way to talk about it. When you think about it this way, there's a few things that are striking to me in our conversation today. One of them is just the idea that there is any livable space at all is kind of a miracle.
Yeah.
And that to find those little bubbles of air where you can breathe is, and that those are there to be found is sort of an initial cause for celebration, right? Even though things are all mixed up, there's a space to breathe. The second thing that occurs to me is this idea that creation here occurs by speech. And so God says things and creation responds. And in a very Brueggemannian fashion, this is also, I think, true of us as human beings, and especially for those who are proclaimers of the biblical text in some kind of faith context. The creation of habitable space out of chaos requires the speaking of it as the first thing, right? And so to say, here's what it could look like, here's what is possible, even though it isn't true just now, that seems really important. And the third thing, maybe there's four things. The third thing that's occurring to me out of that is that one of the things God does is call forth the creativity of others, recognizing that inherent in little plants, but also in animals and every human being is a creative spark that can be called forth. And so it's not that God creates everything by God's self, but God is inviting the creativity of others into creating this habitable space. And then the fourth thing I'm thinking about is, human beings as the imago Dei. Our role as humans, but especially as people of faith, is that we are God's emissaries on the earth. And so if God is to be about the business of creating or recreating a world in the midst of the tohu vavohu that is, like, we are the ones who, in a very direct sense, are invited to carry that out. And so thinking about who we are and what we have to contribute to the creation or recreation of a livable space here and now with each other is an invitation, or maybe a blessing, or maybe a command in this text that's what we're to be about. That's where my head's going with this text today.
That's so beautiful, Bobby. And you hit on so many points that resonate so strongly with me. In particular, you use the word creativity instead of just, I guess it was sort of inherent in there, but the way that God calls forth creativity in calling forth, fertility and, life to create life. But we can also think about that in terms of creativity. And another role that I think Shabbat plays in my life is this space for like really wild imaginings of things that seem impossible, whatever the vision of like the ultimate wholeness and peace and like things that feel entirely other than what is happening in the world right now.
Yes.
We have to imagine them first.
Yes.
And then speak them.
Yes.
And then maybe they can be. And that seventh day gives me a little nudge to do some of that work.
The imagining work. I love that. So thinking of the seventh day really as the first day, where the imagination is the thing that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
There's one other thought that's really in my head, Bobby, and it's like a combination of like Jewish philosophy and Wendell Berry, which is a good like description of what happens in my head. But Wendell Berry has this essay called Two Economies, and in it he speaks against sort of the idea of like something being the sum of its parts. Like you could read this story and say creation is the sum of its parts. Look at all its separate parts and they all do their part, and that's ta-da, that's it. And instead, he advocates for something called the membership of all creation, a membership of parts inextricably joined to each other that receive significance and worth from each other and from the whole. And that, for me, is does such a better job of getting at what this text seems to be doing. It's there is an aspect of like creating different elements within the created world, but then very quickly they function in relationship to each other and derive their meaning from one another. And I think one of the real pain points of human existence right now is that we don't always see each other as part of a system.
Yes.
And sure, that can feel really like freeing and you can just do whatever the heck you want. Like that's nice for a short time.
Yes.
But it really like saps them. It's really lonely, and it really kind of saps the bigger picture meaning out of our days on this earth. Yeah. So I love the idea that we receive our significance, our meaning in relationship to the other parts of creation and what we can do to sustain them so that they can then sustain us.
I really love that, Amy. I had not made that Wendell Berry connection before, and I really love it. And I know you're gesturing to that notion in 131 that God sees humankind in the context of creation, and that's where God says very good. And that I really love that way of I've never been able to say that quite that well. And I really love that way of thinking about it.
It is a powerful story. That's why we read it all the time.
Exactly.
Bobby, next time we will have skipped quite a bit forward to a little bit from Genesis chapter 21, mostly Genesis chapter 22. And we will read the Akedah, the binding of Isaac.
We're just jumping right in this year.
We go. Full speed ahead.
Yeah, and that's one of the most difficult, complicated texts of the Bible too. Talk about the top 5 biblical texts or whatever you were talking about before. We're getting 2 of them in the first 2 weeks here.
The greatest hits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to be back with you, reading text together.
Yes.
I will see you next time.
All right. See you then, Amy.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible. A special thank you to our newest supporters, Sherry Barton-Henry, Kaylee Nelson, Jennifer Moser, Pastor Car Guy, Daniel Smith, Donna Kehoe, Graham Catlett, Bill, Emily Wilkins, Chris Tuttle, Sarah Vanderberg, Marcy Glass, Melissa Early, Wendy Anderson, Kate Davidson, Angel McLean, and Ava Bilton.
Join us again next time when we skip ahead to the story of Isaac's miraculous birth and near death in Genesis chapters 21 and 22. Until then, keep on digging.